It was just after midnight when the first call came. My phone buzzed on the bedside table, the glow of the screen cutting through the darkness of my room. Groggy, I rolled over and squinted at the number. No name, just a string of digits I didn't recognize. Who calls this late? I muttered, letting it go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again. Same number. Annoyed now, I picked it up. Hello? Silence. Hello? I repeated, irritation creeping into my voice. There was a soft crackle, like someone was there, but they weren't saying anything. A faint sound in the background. Breathing, maybe? It was hard to tell. Look, if this is some kind of prank, I started. Before I could finish, the line went dead. I put my phone down, more confused than angry now. Maybe it was just a wrong number. I closed my eyes, trying to settle back into sleep, but it wasn't long before the phone buzzed again. The same number flashed on the screen. I sat up this time, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I debated letting it ring again, but curiosity and something like fear got the better of me. I picked it up. Who is this? More silence. Then, just as I was about to hang up, I heard it. A whisper. A voice so faint I could barely make out what they were saying. I'm watching you. My heart skipped a beat. I glanced around my room, the shadows suddenly seeming darker, the quiet more oppressive. I forced a laugh, trying to shake off the unease. Very funny. I'm hanging up now. But before I could, the voice came again, clearer this time, and it sent a chill down my spine. Check your front door. I froze. My mind raced. Was this some sort of joke? Was someone really outside my front door? I got out of bed and tiptoed to the window. I pulled the curtain back just enough to peer outside. The street was empty, bathed in the dim light of the street lamps. No movement. No one was standing outside of my house. Still, the unease gnawed at me. I slowly made my way to the front door, my phone still clutched in my hand. When I reached it, I hesitated. The house was silent, but my pulse was loud in my ears. I steeled myself and unlocked the door, pulling it open just a crack. At first, I didn't see anything, but then I looked down. There, on my doorstep, was a single photograph. I bent down to pick it up, and when I turned it over, my blood ran cold. It was a picture of me, taken through the window just moments ago. In the image, I was lying in bed, fast asleep. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again in my hand, the same number. I stared at the photo, my hands trembling, and slowly brought the phone to my ear. This time, the voice wasn't a whisper. It was clear, chillingly close. Don't bother locking the door. I'm already inside. I spun around, but the darkness of the house seemed to swallow me. Then, from the shadows, I heard the faint creak of a floorboard, and the line went dead. When I bought the house, everyone warned me about the woods. It was a small, cozy cabin just on the edge of the forest, miles from the nearest town. Perfect for peace and solitude, or so I thought. The woods can play tricks on you, the old man at the gas station had said when I mentioned where I'd be living. You hear things, see things. Most folks can't handle it out there for too long. I brushed off the warning. I grew up in a city where noise was constant, and I figured the silence would take some getting used to, but that was part of the appeal. For the first week, it was everything I hoped for. Quiet, peaceful, a place where I could think, clear my head, and be alone. But that's when the scratching started. It was subtle at first, just a faint, rhythmic sound at night, like branches brushing against the side of the cabin. I ignored it, thinking it was just the wind or some animal passing through. But after a few nights, the scratching grew louder, more deliberate. It wasn't random. It sounded like someone or something was outside, right beneath my bedroom window, clawing at the walls. I checked around the cabin the next morning. There were no signs of any animals, no footprints in the dirt, and no marks on the wood. I told myself it was nothing, probably a raccoon or a stray cat. The next night, I went to bed early, determined not to let my imagination get the best of me. But just as I was dozing off, the scratching came again, slow, insistent, like fingernails dragging against the wooden planks. I lay there, listening to the scratches. This time, it was closer, and I swore I could hear something else. Breathing. The soft, deliberate sound of someone exhaling just outside my window. I shot out of bed and turned on every light in my cabin, hoping the brightness would scare off whatever was lurking outside. When I looked out the window, the woods were still dark and empty. Just the tall trees, their branches swaying lightly in the breeze. By morning, I was exhausted, but trying to stay rational. I considered calling someone, but who would I call? The police? I could imagine how that conversation would go. Hi, yes, there's a scratching outside my window. Can you guys come over and take a look? They'd laugh and chalk it up to the isolation playing tricks on me. That night, I stayed up, determined to catch whatever was causing that noise. I sat in the dark, staring out the window, waiting. Around midnight, it began again, the scratching. But this time, it was accompanied by something else, a shadow, moving just at the edge of the trees. My breath caught in my throat as I squinted, trying to make out what it was. The shadow moved slowly, stopping just where the tree line met my yard. It was a person, or at least it looked like one, but they were tall, too tall, and thin. Their limbs seemed wrong, like they were too long for their body. I couldn't see a face, just a dark silhouette standing unnervingly still, watching my cabin. I grabbed the flashlight I kept by the door and flicked it on, shining it toward the figure. The beam of the light cut through the darkness, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. I shouted, "Hey, get out of here!" My voice felt small, weak against the silence of the night. Still, the figure didn't move. Heart racing, I slowly backed away from the window and locked the door. I grabbed my phone, fingers trembling, and dialed the sheriff's office, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained what was going on. By the time the sheriff arrived, the figure was gone. He shined his flashlight around the yard and into the woods, but there was no sign of anyone. "You're sure you saw someone?" "Yes, right there by the trees," I nodded. He looked unconvinced, but did a quick sweep of the area anyways. When he came back, he sighed. "Look, this place can get to you. The woods, the quiet, they mess with your head. If you hear or see anything else, give me another call. But for now, I'd say get some rest." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of the living room, every light in the house turned on, gripping the flashlight tightly in my hand. The scratching didn't come again, neither did the figure, but the woods seemed to press closer, their dark shapes looming outside every window. For the next few days, I tried to convince myself that I'd imagined it, that the isolation was getting to me, like the sheriff had suggested. But every time I passed by the window, I can't help but look outside and glance towards the trees, half expecting to see that tall, twisted figure watching me again. Then, one night, as I was lying in bed, I heard something new. A voice, low and raspy just outside my window. "Let me in." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the window, praying that whatever was out there would go away. But the voice kept calling, soft and insistent. "Let me in." And this time, I wasn't sure if it was coming from outside the cabin or from within inside the cabin. I'd been looking for a new apartment for weeks when I found it. The rent was cheaper than anything else in the city, and the location was perfect. The only odd thing was that the ad mentioned that the apartment had been empty for a few months, which struck me as strange given the price. But I didn't care. I needed a place, and this was a steal. When I arrived to view it, the landlord, a middle-aged man named Mr. Hargrove, greeted me at the door. His smile was wide but a little forced. As he led me inside, he spoke in a low, almost apologetic tone. This place, well, it's had a bit of a turnover lately. People seem to leave after just a few months. Not quite sure why, but nothing serious. Just people moving on, I guess. I brushed off his warning, figuring it was the usual spiel of landlords trying to explain away high tenant turnover. People move for all kinds of reasons. As long as the plumbing worked and the rent stayed low, I was sold. The apartment itself was nothing special, just a standard, one-bedroom with creaky floors and the faint smell of the old wood. But it was clean, spacious, and within my budget. I signed the lease the same day. For the first couple of weeks, everything was fine. I settled in, unpacked, and made the place my own. There was a bit of noise from the neighboring apartments, but nothing unusual for a city building. The only thing that bothered me was the sense that the place felt off. It was hard to explain. Sometimes I'd walk into a room and feel like I was being watched, or I'd hear faint creaks and footsteps when I knew no one else was home. Then, one night, things started to get strange. I was lying in bed, about to drift off to sleep, when I heard it. A soft, shuffling sound coming from the living room. My first thought was that someone had broken in. I sat up, straining to listen. The sound came again, slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the floor. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police, but after a few moments, the footsteps stopped. I waited, breath held, but there was only silence. Gathering my courage, I crept out of bed and into the living room. It was empty. I checked every corner, every window, every lock, all secure. No sign of a break-in. I told myself it must have been the old wood of the apartment settling down, or maybe someone in the unit next door. But deep down, I didn't believe it. The next few nights were worse. The footsteps returned, always at the same time, around midnight. They moved from room to room, slow and deliberate, like someone pacing the apartment. But every time I got to check, the place was empty. Then, I started seeing things. One evening, as I was watching TV, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow, just at the edge of my vision, darting from the hallway into the bedroom. I whipped my head around, but there was nothing there. This continued for days, shadows flickering in the corners, things moving just out of sight. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that I was tired, stressed, and imagining this. But it felt real. Too real. The breaking point came one night when I was brushing my teeth before bed. I glanced up at the bathroom mirror and froze. Standing behind me, just barely visible in the reflection, was a figure. It was a woman. Pale, with long dark hair, her eyes sunken and hollow. She was staring at me through the mirror, her mouth slightly open, as though she was about to say something. I spun around, but the bathroom was empty. I left the apartment that night, staying at a friend's place for a few days. I didn't tell my friend what I'd seen. I wasn't sure if she even believed it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with that apartment. When I finally worked up the nerve to return, I asked our tenant, Mr. Hargrove, if anything unusual had happened in the apartment before I moved in. He hesitated, his smile fading. Well, there was a woman who lived there a while back. Nice girl. Quiet. Then she disappeared. Actually, no one ever found her, but some people say she might have. He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. It's an old building. Things creak, you know? But there's nothing wrong with the place. Nothing at all. I moved out a week later. I don't know what happened to the woman who lived there before me, but sometimes late at night I still think about her. I wonder if she's still there in that apartment, pacing the floors, waiting for someone to notice she's there. And I wonder if the next tenant will.